Welcome to your deep dive. We're diving deep into Robert Greene this time around.
Oh, yeah, Green. What did you have in mind?
Well, we've got this great interview with him, the 48 Laws of Power guy.
I know his work, definitely. A lot
Yeah,
of buzz around that. What's the interview from?
it's from that YouTube channel, The Diary of a CEO. And it's packed with stuff. Human nature, power dynamics, even finding your purpose. We're going to try to unpack it all. We'll even touch on what makes a good smile, believe it or not.
Sounds interesting. Where should we jump in? Green's got a lot to say, usually.
Well, right off the bat, he gets into this idea that we're all actors. Kind of unsettling when you really think about it. Like, humors are inherently deceptive, putting on these social masks in just about every interaction.
Right, right. I've heard him talk about that before. The masks we wear, for sure.
But what I like is that he doesn't just leave it there. He challenges us to become more aware of our own acting, those little ways we try to manage impressions. Like that self-awareness is key to navigating this whole thing.
Totally. Otherwise, it can get kind of manipulative, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it even has this whole bit about frenemies, which is a little unnerving, to be honest. He says you can spot them by get this, approaching them unexpectedly.
Unexpectedly. Okay, I'm curious.
And then watch for like a split second micro expression of disdain, basically, before they have time to put their mask back on.
That's fascinating. There's actually a ton of research on microexpressions. They're like these tiny windows into real emotions because they're so hard to fake.
You're kidding. I thought that was just Green being, well, Green, a little provocative.
Nope. It's legit science. And he's spot on about the eyes, too. They're a dead giveaway. It's the difference between those flat, dead eyes he talks about.
Versus someone being genuinely engaged with you.
Exactly. It's all in the eyes.
So it's not really about becoming a master manipulator ourselves,
Yeah.
right? It's more about recognizing those tactics so we're not the ones being played.
Exactly. Forewarned is forearmed, as they say.
Right. Knowledge is power, for sure. And speaking of power, Green talks a lot about purpose in this interview and how having a strong sense of purpose can help you navigate these, I don't want to say power struggles, but
Dynamics, for sure.
yes. And he ties it to decision-making, which I found really interesting. He says, knowing your purpose helps you be more decisive and avoid distractions. It reminded me of this thing I struggle with, decision fatigue. Have you heard of that?
Oh, all the time, especially these days, right? Like
Hmm.
too many choices, too many options. It's overwhelming.
Yes, exactly. And he actually talks about this with an anecdote from his own life, which I found super relatable. So he gets all these offers, right, for movies, TV shows, even games based on his books, which on the surface sounds pretty awesome.
Right. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Must be nice to have that problem.
Yeah. But then what he does is actually really interesting. He mentally walks through all the potential downsides of each opportunity, like really games it out.
Okay, so he doesn't just get swept up in it. That's smart.
Right. Like he thinks about the meetings, the creative compromises, the potential to lose control over his work. And often he ends up saying no.
Wow. Even to, like, potentially big money.
Even then,
Yes.
because for him, it always comes back to purpose. And he recognizes that sometimes saying no is actually the best way to say yes to what really matters.
It's choosing your path rather than getting pulled in a million directions.
Yeah.
Prioritizing what's important.
Exactly. And that actually leads perfectly into another key takeaway. This idea that it's okay not to be Steve Jobs. Like, you don't have to build $1 billion company to have a meaningful life.
I like where this is going.
He argues that true fulfillment can come from any craft. And he uses this really memorable example.
Oh, is this the tile guy? I love that story.
Yes, the master tile setter. He talks about how this guy, who probably won't ever be famous, finds so much satisfaction in his work, in the mastery of it.
Yeah.
And it just totally changed my perspective.
It's so easy, especially now, to think you have to be like the next Bezos, right? But Green's saying, no, find joy in the doing, the dedication to excellence, whatever it is you're passionate about.
It's about that intrinsic motivation. It's funny, he actually compares it to barometric pressure.
Barometric pressure. Okay, now I'm confused.
Right, but he means it's like this constant force that motivates you to show up, to
Right.
do the work. And he says without it, people tend to stagnate.
Interesting. So it's not about being comfortable all the time.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot, a healthy amount of pressure to keep growing and avoid complacency. And maybe that looks different for everyone. But Green seems to be saying that's where the magic happens, in that sweet spot.
Hmm.
So speaking of dot pressure, How does envy play into all of this?
It's a big one. Envy, right? I mean, talk about a powerful emotion. And Green really gets into it. He sees it as this major motivator, even if we're not always conscious of it.
Right. And it makes you think about all the ways we size each other up, especially now with social media, right? Like it's this constant comparison game.
And that's where his whole frenemy thing comes in, which, let's be honest, is a little scary when you think about it. Someone pretending to be your friend, but secretly jealous, maybe even trying to sabotage you. Ouch.
Yeah, not cool. And he actually gives you this very specific thing to watch out for, this red flag. People who are way too eager to become your friend, rushing the
We're
relationship.
coming on too strong.
Exactly. And it makes you realize it's good to be a little cautious, especially as you get older, your life changes, you achieve things, you attract different kinds of attention.
It's true. And maybe this sounds bad, but I think being secure in yourself, knowing what you're working towards, helps protect you from that kind of energy?
Totally, like comparison is the thief of joy and all that.
Yeah.
Which reminds me actually of something really heavy Green talks about, his stroke a few years back.
Yeah, wow. That really shook him up, understandably. He's been pretty open about it.
He has. And it seems like it totally shifted his perspective, not just on, mortality, but on those everyday moments, appreciating what you have.
Yeah. He's talked about how it forced him to confront some really big questions he'd been avoiding. And out of that, he got really interested in this idea of the sublime, which
Yeah.
is...
What's the sublime exactly? I'm not sure I totally get it.
It's kind of hard to pin down, but basically it's that feeling of awe and wonder you get when you encounter something vast and powerful, something beyond your everyday understanding. Like, picture yourself standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon or seeing a crazy sunset that just blows your mind. Those are sublime moments.
Okay, I get it. And I remember now, Green had all these big adventures planned, right?
Yeah.
To really explore this idea for his new book, like crossing the Gobi Desert, swimming with whales in New Zealand.
Totally. He was going all in. And then the stroke.
Talk about a plot twist.
It was. But here's the thing, and I love this about Green. He actually says the book is better because of the stroke.
What? Seriously? How?
Well, it forced him to find the sublime in the everyday, in nature, books, just quiet moments reflecting. Like, you don't have to travel to the ends of the earth to experience awe.
I love that. He even talks about, like, writing a whole chapter on animals, on how we connect with other species. He's looking at birds outside his window, his cat, with this whole new level of fascination.
Right. It's like this beautiful reminder that limitations can actually lead to amazing things, new ways of seeing.
So cool.
Yeah.
He also gets into this ancient Greek idea of the daemon, which I thought was interesting, like a guardian spirit or a higher self that guides you. It reminded me of those weird moments where things just fall into place.
Synchronicity?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it all preordained or are we just making stuff up?
Who knows? But I think it speaks to this human need to believe there's something more, even if we can't explain it.
Totally. But even when he's getting all deep like that, Green always brings it back to the practical, like strategy. He has this saying he uses, and I don't think he means it cynically, but it's all a game.
It's about understanding the rules, right?
Yeah.
Not to be a manipulator, but to navigate the game board, whatever that game board is for you.
Exactly. And he actually talks about this in the context of politics, which obviously feels relevant right now. Like, he's tired of hearing people just complain about what they hate. He wants to know, what's your vision? What are you building?
I like that. It's about being proactive.
Right. And that takes strategy. He even says, which I thought was kind of funny, the opposite of strategy is stupidity.
Ouch.
Right. Like, that lack of strategic thinking, especially in leadership, well, look around.
Yeah, not great. So how do we become more strategic in our own lives?
Well, Green says a big part of it is learning to detach from your emotions, to be objective about a situation, which easier said than done, right?
100%. We all know how quickly things can go sideways when we're reacting emotionally.
Right. You make impulsive choices you regret later.
Oh, tell me about it. But Green actually gives this really good tip. It's so simple but effective. He's talking about how when he gets an email or a message that really sets him off, he writes his response but doesn't send it.
Ooh, that's good. Let it simmer a little bit.
Exactly. He leaves it in his drafts folder for a few days, and usually when he goes back to it, he's like, oh, why didn't send that?
It's like that space between the stimulus and response, right?
Yeah.
That's what mindfulness is all about.
It really is. Remembering we have a choice in how we respond, even when it's tough.
So powerful. Which actually leads us to this really poignant moment in the interview where the host asks Green this big question. If you could change one thing about the last 10 years of your life,
It's a loaded question, right? I mean, so much had happened.
For sure. So what does he say?
He keeps it real. He says flat out, I wish I could take back the stroke.
Makes sense. He talks about how he was pushing himself incredibly hard back then, writing The Laws of Human Nature, burning the candle at both ends, neglecting his health.
Oh, yeah, he goes there. The stress, a medication he'd forgotten to take, even this weird thing with a wasp sting he thinks played a role. Crazy, right?
Wow. He
Yeah.
really connects the dots.
He does, and it sounds like he's really looked back on that time, tried to unpack it. He even says, if I'd been more tuned into my body, maybe I could have avoided it. Hindsight, right?
It's tough, for sure. But he doesn't seem, I don't know, totally mired in regret. He actually makes a joke about forgiving the wasp at one point.
That's Green, finding humor in the darkness. But in all seriousness, he seems to have made peace with it. He talks about that stoic idea, amor fati, loving your fate, like he wouldn't change it because it led him to where he is now.
He even wonders if something worse might have happened if he hadn't had the stroke, like some other crisis, because of how hard he tends to push himself.
A wild, right?
It is. It's like he's saying, we can't control everything. Life's gonna life. What we can control is how we respond to it all, which honestly is kind of what Stoicism is all about.
Okay, that makes sense. So less about controlling the world, more about mastering your own inner world. Exactly. Green even talks about how he and the interviewer got into this whole what-if spiral about the stroke. What if he hadn't forgotten that one medication? What if that wasp had buzzed off somewhere else?
It makes your brain hurt a little thinking about it that way.
Rabbit hole. But it highlights how interconnected everything is, even if we don't always see it.
And sometimes things are just outside our control, right?
Totally. So focus on what you can influence. Like the Stoics say, that's where true freedom is.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about forcing the world to be a certain way, but finding that inner peace no matter what's going on.
Nailed it.
And that in itself is powerful.
Hmm.
Which, speaking of power, I love how Green ends the interview on this surprisingly optimistic note. They're talking about legacy, what he wants to leave behind.
Right, right. The big picture stuff.
And he says the one constant in all his books is this idea, this is what the world is really like. Not good, not bad, just IS. And he wants people to embrace that reality, illusions and all.
It's like, stop trying to make the world fit into your little box. Be open to it all.
Exactly. And in that, he suggests you find true freedom.
Powerful stuff. Green always keeps it interesting, even when things get heavy.
He really does. This deep dive has taken us everywhere, from frenemies to sublime ancient philosophy to wasp stings. It's a lot to think about.
For sure. It makes you look at things a little differently. Question your assumptions,
Totally. So for you, dear listener, what will you approach differently today? Even the smallest shift can make a difference. Keep that in mind as you continue your own deep dive.